Keen to give me the nod. we have do we have everyone on stage? We do have a policy being launched right now, so there will be a latecomer. Welcome everybody, welcome Minister, members of the Oireachtas, media, you, us, morning. First of all, I'd love to thank Sean Dunn for letting us invade literally the stage. It's fitting, I think, that the current play in the project is Restoration. And it's a amazing play. It's only on for the weekend. Please buy your tickets. Cian will direct you to the box office, all of you, on your way out. It's a great play. You should see it. Welcome to the National Campaign for the Arts Hustings for the general election 2020. I will say on a personal note that when we met on January 4th to plan our year, we were planning for a March one. I am aware we have little time here this morning, and I want most of it dedicated to hearing from the parties who will be hoping to and want to address yours and our interests and those of the sector in the next government. I'd love for those of you here to concentrate and give all of your energy, and those of you indeed watching on YouTube and Facebook, welcome, from all over the country, to examine the different plans from each party and examine their plans for investment in the arts, investigate them. I'm confident that each of the policies we hear today will be shared with all party members running an election. Knock on the door, interrogate them. Hopefully by the time today is finished, you'll be as honest as they will. So engage. I would urge you to engage with them on your doorstep and vote then. And all of us vote. There are many thousands of us. Would encourage you to vote according to the person and the party you think will do best by artists and do best by those who support them to make work and who make work with them. I'd love to kick off the event by sharing with the parties what the Ncfa, what you every year in December with your, thank you very much again for that, for figuring out those details on our annual research, what you're calling for and demanding from the next government. Our manifesto is that the arts in Ireland are a national resource, that they're a necessity, not a luxury, and that the arts are an asset and not an overhead. A couple of key things you might take away with you. It's 72% of artists working in Ireland earn less than national minimum wage. 72% of artists and those working in the arts do not have a pension. And 48% of them do not have health insurance. The other stark and worrying and really unacceptable figure is that the Irish government investment in the arts and culture is lower, far lower than in any other country in Europe, representing just 0.11% of GDP compared to the European average, which is 0.6%. Some good facts and positive things. More people attended paid art events in Dublin, in Ireland, sorry. For a Cork girl, that's enough. That's my passport revoked this weekend. More people attend paid arts events in Ireland every year than attend all GAA championship events. The arts make money for Ireland. You are investing, you are not donating, granting, you are investing in the arts. To the tune of, for every euro invested in the arts and culture, 2 is returned in direct taxation to government, and based on a 193 million investment in 2022. Cultural tourism is worth over 5.1 billion to the economy, including both domestic and overseas tourism. The feel-good importance. We all know the value of the arts. You as the makers and those who help people to make art know the value of it. But 4 of the top 6 happiness-inducing activities in a global scale are arts-related. I was going to refer to the other 2, but I think you've seen our tweets. You know what they are. And in this context, the Ncfa, on your behalf, calls on all candidates at the upcoming general election to commit to at least doubling investment in culture and the arts by 2025 over the life of the next government. And this must, and this is key, this must include a commitment to double investment in the Arts Council and in Culture Ireland over the same period, because they are the agencies who directly support us to make work and to grow careers. On a personal level, I would love to thank my colleagues in the voluntary steering committee of the Ncfa who have worked ridiculously over the last couple of weeks to get our manifesto together, to get it out to you, to get the parties here today, although to all of your credit, that was the easy part. We've also worked together for the past 5 years of government to make sure that arts and artists remain high in the government and national agenda where it belongs. So I would urge you, regardless of who among our number here on stage occupies the position to make a real difference to how art making and art makers are supported in government, we look forward to working with whoever amongst you that is towards the same goal. You and us will be working together to invest in a sector in dire need and of huge importance. And finally, I would ask you to engage. We have a very short amount of time this morning. I would ask you to engage after the parties have presented their manifestos, to engage in questions about those manifestos. And on their way out, outside we've made a poster. Take photos with it, share it on your social media, stick it in your window so that those who come to your doorstep know what you care about. I'd love to hand you over now to Hugh LINEHAN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Well said. Thank you to the Ncfa for organising this event. I think it's great to see it. It's great to see a great turnout from the representatives of the different parties. I'm to say a few very brief words. I don't take the Ivan Yates approach to these events. You'll be glad to hear. But just to say that each speaker is going to speak for between 3 and 5 minutes, and in my view, 3 is better than 5, but I'll leave that up to them. But I will look to step in if they are going beyond that. And just a couple of pointers, if you wouldn't mind, about I think what this audience in particular would like to hear about. There's an awful lot of blather talked about the arts. There's an awful lot of guff about the central place of the arts and culture in Irish society. And there's a lot less specifics a lot of the time. So I think what we're looking for today, in as much as possible, is specifics. Numbers are great, percentages are great, timeframes are great. So that's one point. The other point I'd make is that the culture brief changes from government to government. Sometimes it includes things like sport and sometimes it doesn't. But it's generally a very broad brief, and it includes areas that are extremely important, such as heritage, capital investment in national institutions, access to the educational system. Those things are all vital, and they are connected with what we're talking about today. But the core issue I think here today is the creative arts in Ireland, supporting artists, making sure they get a living wage and allowing them to pursue their careers. And there are some elements of that which aren't covered within these briefs. The housing crisis has as much impact on artists as many other issues of government policy do at the moment. What's happening with venue performance spaces and workspaces is incredibly important. It may not fall within the briefs of ministers in the next government. But let's focus, I would like, if possible, as Angela suggests, to focus on this question of artists. Artists, creative artists, are at the core of this question, and they are the most precarious of the precarious. There's no secret why it's called the gig economy. The clue is in the name. They were precarious before anybody else was precarious. How are we going to support them in a way which is commensurate with the value which, as Angela says, they bring to this society? So I'm going to ask each party spokesperson to come forward. They're in order of their current representation in the Dáil, which of course may not be the same as their representation in the next Dáil. But we'll see how that turns out. We'll know all about that in little over a week. First, I'd like to call on the Minister, Josepha Madigan.
Thank you very much, Hugh. It's a real, I'm technically still a minister, actually. I'm not a TD, which is a kind of an anomaly. For the moment, anyway. I certainly don't take it for granted. But I have to say, it's been an enormous pleasure to be the Minister for Culture over the last 2 years. And I feel it's not long enough for all the things that I want to do. But I'll be as brief as I can going through some of the achievements that I've had and also what our plan is in Fine Gael for the future. But I just want to thank the Ncfa for hosting this event today, because it's really important in the general election debate that we have a discussion, that we're honest about where we want to go, the pathway that we want to move to. And often, as been said numerous occasions, the arts can be neglected, and for many years it has been. And so I just want to thank you, and I'm really, really thrilled to have an excuse not to be knocking on doors to come to this today, because I'm the Minister for Culture, because I have a personal interest in the arts myself, and because I enjoy it so much. I think Fine Gael in government has a proven track record of answering the calls for increased investment in this sector. And if you think about the fact that it has increased very significantly from 158 million in 2017, and you've asked for specifics, so you to give them to you, to 193 million in 2020. So we've increased also the funding to the Arts Council to 80 million in 2020, which is the highest level since 2009. And also, which is really, really important, I brought a memo to Cabinet in December, which secured a government commitment for the first time to double funding for my department by 2025. So an overall spend, it was 288 million in 2017, then it'll be 576 million in 2025. And this government decision means that any future government, whoever it is, whether it's led by Gael or Fianna Fáil, will have to base their funding decisions for culture funding on this. I feel if I did anything over the last 2 years, that's something that I'm probably most proud of, because I think it will have ramifications. In fact, I know it will have ramifications for successive governments, whoever they may be. We also brought in a committed capital investment of 265 million for culture and creativity and 460 million for our national culture institutions. And I see some of the directors here today under Project Ireland 2040. And this is the first ever multinational long-term capital funding plan for our Irish culture institutions. Another legacy of mine, I hope, if I'm not back in situ in this position again, is the Percent for Art scheme. This hadn't been changed, hadn't moved since 1997. And now the contribution that can be made from public capital projects to a culture project will be much closer to 1%. And this will create a potential additional investment of 1 billion in arts and culture projects over the life of Project Ireland 2040. But as well as increasing investment in culture and the arts, we're undertaking initiatives to specifically support individual artists and creatives. We've extended the social welfare scheme for artists, which I know is something that the Ncfa had called for a very long time, to almost all professional art groups. We're linking very generous tax reliefs for the film industry directly to improved training opportunities. We're introducing also new regulation to outlaw zero-hour contracts. You mentioned that in relation to legislation to protect vulnerable workers, and Regina Doherty was of great assistance in relation to that. We're also working with local authorities, including Dublin City Council, to develop new studios and spaces for artists in our cities and towns. And the Cultural Capital Scheme will see an investment of 4.5 million in the development of art and creative facilities around Ireland. I've also supported a number of initiatives, such as the Speak Up and Call It Out with SIPTU, to ensure greater dignity for those in the arts and arts practitioners. Also providing 6 million in funding to assist Irish artists from all practices under Culture Ireland to promote and develop their work abroad. And this includes partnering with arts organisations like First Music Contact. Some other things, only on the 10th of January, which seems like a year ago, it was only this month, we actually launched Ireland's very first cultural policy framework. And I was really pleased to be able to do that, and that we unify and add a cohesion to a lot of the work that we're doing already together, and it will set out a roadmap for where we want to go to, and bringing a lot of the disparate threads together into one. I've also appointed 5 cultural ambassadors for Ireland. I've established the Markowitz bursaries, which has been a great success, and it's already open for applications for this year. And I'm also providing 15 million in support for Galway 2020, which I hope will have opportunities for artists there as well.
Minister, 30 seconds, please.
Okay. The audiovisual plan, the extension section, I mentioned that about the section 48, Creative Ireland, the National Creative Fund. Very briefly, in terms of our plans for the future then, we are going to double the funding for culture by 2025, as I said already, including significantly increasing funding, excuse me, to the Arts Council. So if you're looking from a figures perspective, in 2017 it was 67.5 million. In 2025, the Arts Council will receive 134 million. And I'm giving you that commitment now. We are the only party that in our manifesto commits to doubling the funding by 2025. We will sustain creative spaces through the creation of a new fund, which local authorities can access for joint funding to create new spaces and studios. We have new bursary schemes, and also there's the Nightmares initiative, the NSO, and other issues that we want to do. But I can tell you, and I can assure you, that the Taoiseach, Pascal Donovan and myself are completely committed to this sector, and I for one will make sure that that commitment is honoured. Thank you.
This one is working. I'll hop up here for a second. I'd now like to call on Malcolm Byrne. Malcolm has stepped in very kindly at short notice for Niamh Smith, who had a bereavement which she had to deal with today. So Malcolm.
Good morning to you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. And I do, as you mentioned, I do send the apologies of Niamh Smith, our art spokesperson, who unfortunately due to bereavement can't be here. But I am happy to be here as her understudy. And I just want to make, I suppose, in response to you, I'll try to be brief about 3 key points. One, to set out the vision for the arts of a Fianna Fáil-led government. Secondly, to look at dealing with a number of specific issues. And thirdly, the approach with regard to funding. So the vision of a Fianna Fáil-led government with regard to the arts is that the arts sector will be independent, it will be adequately resourced, and it will be sustainable. It was Fianna Fáil in coalition with the Labour Party that set up a full Department of the Arts as an independent department. And in response to your earlier point, in a Fianna Fáil-led government, the arts part of a new department will be the lead part of that new department. And in terms of the other elements of that department, which would include heritage, we would also look at, for instance, some of the areas around media and content creation that are in the Department of Communications coming in within that department. It may make more sense to have those. But very clearly, it's also essential that the arts are seen as an all-of-government approach. Key to all of that is that the independence of the arts will always be recognised and will be maintained. And we will restore the independence of the Arts Council. We will restore the arm's length principle when it comes to funding by the Arts Council and indeed by Cllr Ireland. We don't believe that Cllr Ireland should operate as a subsidiary of the Department of the Arts. It should be an independent body, and again, there should be arm's length funding that should apply. To deal with a number of very specific issues. And I know you talked about, for the support to individual artists and indeed for individual production companies. I think given the Theatre Forum review, it's very clear that issues need to be addressed about ensuring that there is a sustainable income for all that are working in the sector. I think it's also important that what we look at is we can't just be supporting established theatres. We've got to look at supporting emerging artists and emerging theatres. When we would have seen, for instance, the theatre upstairs closing in March of last year, Collapsing Horse also closing, you can't have a vibrant theatre sector without measures in place to support those emerging companies. Insurance is a huge issue that affects groups involved in artistic activity, as it does in a whole range of other areas of Irish society. One of the first parliamentary questions that I asked, having been elected a TD at the end of November, was specifically about assurance for arts-based bodies. The Minister, in her response, it was the classic response with regards to any question that was asked for insurance. We have another report, we have another review, we have another report. Insurance is a huge issue within this sector, as in others. Within our manifesto, there are a whole series of very clear commitments about how we will deal with the crisis in insurance to ensure that premiums come down, that there's more competition in the market, and that arts organisations can get access to affordable insurance. I wanted to run one issue which we've been very strong on, and which certainly my are that for a country, the only country in the world where we have a musical instrument as our national symbol, that we haven't seen fit to adequately support our National Symphony Orchestra. When the Minister intervened, there were a series of redundancies that were announced. We now have a National Symphony Orchestra where a third of the orchestra, a third of the posts of the full-time posts in the orchestra are vacant. It's impossible for an orchestra to be creative when it's not functioning at a full level. And I contrasted with respect, Minister, to that of your constituency colleague and how he's managed to bail out the FAI in spite of all of the financial difficulties there, and yet the same level of support, it doesn't exist for the National Symphony Orchestra. I want to make very clear that as part of the Fianna Fáil government, the National Symphony Orchestra will become a standalone cultural institution. Finally, on the funding side, and I know this is an issue, and in our manifesto, people are going to point out, we're not committing to doubling funding, and people will point out that's because we're going to be honest. We're not going to get into the auction politics. When Leo Varadkar, running for the Fine Gael leadership, said he'd commit doubling funding of the arts, there was no time frame that was given. The goalposts keep moving. We've heard the minister announce here it's been moved to 2025. What we said is, yes, we will be supporting a sustainable arts sector. We're not going to get into the auction of doubling it to whether it's 130 million or 160 million. What we do say, though, is look at the parties that have been in government and their track record in terms of investment in the arts, and we will ensure that the supports will be provided. So in summary, what we are certainly committing to is to more funding and to sustainable employment for individual artists, not just investments in capital projects. What we are very strongly committing to is the independence of the arts sector and of arts organisations and the arm's length principle. And finally, what we are committing is to ensure that we recognise artistic opportunity rather than continuing the government policy of treating the arts as a photo opportunity. Your moment.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. I got a minor constitutional lesson this week. The minister is still a minister. The TDs are no longer TDs, but senators are still senators. So I'd like to ask Senator Fintan, Warfield, and Sinn Féin.
Thank you, Hugh. And I'd like to first commend the National Campaign for the Arts for organising today's event, to Tom, to Angela, to Cian, and many more across the country who fight in their constituencies for the arts and who can't be here or watching online because they're at work. So I'll do as Hugh has said, and I'll start with figures, but just firstly, I suppose I'll just identify Sinn Féin's 5 priorities in this election. They are to raise incomes, to increase money towards creative spaces, to prioritise reform in nightlife, to address the economic barriers in participation and access, alongside a youth arts strategy. And then the 5th is to increase funding to the Heritage Council to stop the way we're at. We used to go through Fáil Ireland for heritage funding and to justify heritage on the basis of bed spaces and tourist numbers, and to protect Moore Street. So I said I'd start with figures. We need to decide what figures we're talking about. The NCFA say the figure is 193 million. If we were to include everything that the government spends on arts, from the Garda band to the Defence Force, the Army band, to the tax exemptions, to the cultural institutions, the BAI, to RTE, that figure would be 379 million. And that amounts to 0.11% of GDP, which is what we all accept is Ireland's spend on these areas. The EU average is 0.6%. So if we brought our arts spend there, it would be 1.8 billion. So the EU spend is 6 times our current spend. So we need to find out ways to pay for this, and what kind of Ireland we want to live in, and what kind of tax revenue we want to move towards that space. What Sinn Féin have committed to in this election is to invest 137.5 million above what we invest now. General government spending as a percentage of GDP is 26%. We're lower than the United States, lower than Germany, Denmark, lower than the Netherlands, and lower than France. So people who present plans to bring us to the EU average need to present plans to increase our tax base, and Sinn Féin are the only party that will do this while giving workers and families a break. Ending the corporation tax holiday for banks, taxing intangible assets onshored by multinationals, and introducing 5% income levy on individuals who earn above 140,000. I also want to say from the outset that a lot of the issues facing artists and individual artists will be addressed when we deal with the housing crisis. Aggressively bringing vacant units into play, doubling the vacant site levy for renters in the private sector, putting a month's rent back in their pockets, through a tax break, an emergency freeze on rents for 3 years, and delivering 100,000 public homes on public land and raising the income limits for qualification to public housing. Aside from housing, I think on artists is the inability to earn a living. Our culture and arts is built on the back of people who earn 12 to 13,000 euro a year. Creative flight is real. My friends are leaving, they're going to Berlin. The people who create events, who hold nights, who create art, unable to access living space, working space, unable to earn a living wage, insurance costs, and costs of living. So what Sinn Féin want to do is immediately introduce a €4 million fund that would roll out a local living wage initiative through local authorities. And we would also increase Arts Council funding by 20 million per annum. So,
It's your 30-second warning.
okay, well, look, just go through the other issues very briefly. In terms of nightlife, we want to continue to work. I know some people here from Give Us Tonight. I think some people here from Give Us Tonight want to commend their campaign. We want to continue to work with John on the committee. The Minister has done good work on this that needs to be continued. I mentioned the instrumentalisation of heritage through Fáil to Ireland and tourism. We want to roll out a national youth arts strategy that will complement creative skills around the non-formal education environment, youth theatres, youth centres, and youth orchestras. And I think I will leave it there. So, Byrne, Madigan.
Our next speaker is Councillor Rebecca Moynihan of the Labour Party.
I'm not used to doing that anymore, seeing we've been jumping down in the numbers. I don't really want to. I'm gonna focus and talk on two specific issues because I think people have been talking about sectoral support until Fintan came along and the money that's gone into the sector. But I also want to talk about the people in the sector and the issues that affect them. I think Fintan alluded to that as well. Our isn't just about what we're giving big cultural institutions, it's about the people behind it. And issues such as housing, the cost of living, taxation and childcare also affect that. And I think we have a choice in this election, and there's a clear distinction between the parties, let's say the two bigger parties, and then the other parties. Are we going to vote for tax cuts for people in the higher paid people, and are we going to focus on tax cuts, or are we going to focus on investment in both public services and in the arts? The Labour Party have committed to doubling arts funding over the next 5 years to 20% in the first year. I noticed that Malcolm said that Fáil wasn't going to do that, but I think it is important for a reason, as long as we have a sustainable tax base. But I don't want to see a situation where we get into investing in the arts on a daily basis, like we did in the 2000s, and then if another crisis hits, it's suddenly pulled from underneath it. So I think that there's an argument to be made in investing in the people, but also the cultural infrastructure and the lower levels of cultural infrastructure. And that's what I want to talk about a little now, and increasing funding streams. We have proposed, and according to the Council, the Labour Party have proposed what is a hotel bed tax. So you're talking about 1%, which will have a yield of about 15 million. That also has the benefit of it will give a yield to regional arts scenes around the world, such as Kilkenny, or around the country, such as Kilkenny, and such as Kerry as well. And I think that's important in terms of having a sustainable funding and income stream coming in for the arts. One of the things that I know many people in this room, we're looking at Dublin changing at the moment. We're looking at places, artist studios closing down, and we're looking at very fancy luxury hotels coming in its place. And this is a way of ensuring a funding stream, a sustainable funding stream, but also that artist studios, places where people work, places where people gather, places where creators are inspired with each other, are having a more long-term cultural infrastructure applied. Myself and Cllr Byrne have done a bit of work on
City Council around that, around studio spaces, around having long-term infrastructure that's there. One of the things that have always stuck out for me is that Broadstone spent over €1 million in rent on their studios before they were taken over and kicked out. We don't need to make those same mistakes again. And I'm glad the Minister is here, because I think it's a really good idea for organisations such as the Arts Council look at actually providing mortgages for arts organisations, where we have City Council land, where we have state land, of buying and developing capital infrastructure. And rather than giving funding for people to pay rent on short-term units that will be then told, well, in 5 or 10 years, the things are going to pick up, we're going to apply for planning permission, you're going to be kicked out, that we're actually applying, that we're holding that cultural infrastructure going forward and into the future. And I just want to focus a little bit on taxation as well, because we know from the national campaign for the arts that arts professionals are amongst the lowest paid. In the Fine Gael proposals around widening the tax bands, we're looking at the top percentage of top fifth of households gaining by 3,000 to 5,000 a year, or the lowest income percentage households not gaining anything in those. They matter. They matter as much as how much the national cultural institutions are going to get. They matter as much as how much has been promised under Project Ireland. Rolling out a national childcare scheme matters as much as funding and commitment to the arts sector, because the people in the arts sector are reliant on private childcare, where they can't get crash places, where it's costing them a second mortgage, but actually rent. Housing matters for people in the arts sector as well, because housing matters for people in the arts sector. By now, people looking at who they're going to vote for, they look at the wider policies and how it will affect the people in the sector, and not just the sector and not just the cultural institutions, and then look on a longer term basis of, we don't want to see a cash influx of money, but it's actually not sustainable. And in 10 years' time, if there's another recession, there's retraction in the sector is hammered again, that it's building a sustainable future for the arts sector. Thank you.
So Rebecca mentioned Councillor Cllr Byrne of the Green Party, and a stroke of serendipity, she's our next speaker.
Never flip when you want them to. Thanks a million to the National Campaign for the Arts for inviting me here today. I'm actually not a candidate in the general election, but I'm stepping in for Eamon Ryan, who had hoped to be here. I am Green Party spokesperson for the party on arts, culture and heritage. And we live here. Do you want to do this? Anyway, I'm not a candidate. I'm also not an artist. So, you know, you don't need me to stand in this room full of creatives and tell you what the issues are. You know better than anyone how challenging it is to make work in this country right now due to reduced funding, erosion of space and ever increasing costs. So despite being an environmentalist, much of my own work as a councillor over the last 5.5 years has been focusing on arts and culture. Along with Rebecca, I'm an active member of the Arts Strategic Policy Committee. We've established an artist studio working group. We've been looking at street art. And my own particular interest is looking at arts from a planning perspective. And we have had some success. We introduced objectives in the local development plan, some of which will see the first of a new Market Square development in Boland's Mill. The Pigeon House site will be redeveloped as a cultural home creative hub in the city, and the 5% provision in this Coolbeg West strategic development zone, which will include 40 artist studios. That's been secured by Board Panola. That will happen. We need to see what shape it takes. It's completely unprecedented, but that will happen. But we need to do better, and we need to replicate those at a national level. And the Green Party very much recognise the critical importance of arts for a flourishing society. We understand the diversity and the creativity and the economic value that our creative community has, both nationally and internationally. Our manifesto is very much focused on ensuring that we're placing the arts at the very centre of our economic and our planning decisions. For us, it's about bricks and mortar, it's about education, it's about money, and ensuring that national policy is always supporting our creative community. So in terms of money, we have committed to, we've obviously seen a huge reduction in funding over the last decade. We want to spend the next decade making sure that we not only restore that, but go beyond that. We want to bring, in line with your own policy, your own call for the new government to bring the Arts Council funding back to 2008 levels of 82 million, with the view to doubling that investment over the next 5 years. To bring us up to a EU average. We want to introduce multi-year funding for large organisations so you can plan for the future. We want match funding schemes for smaller arts organisations in rural and peripheral areas. We want to continue Section 481 to ensure we can support the vibrant TV and production industry that we have, and look at how we can extend that in terms of music rights for musicians as well in the film industry. We want to ensure that we have building studios in the city. We want to expand the social welfare pilot and examine the possibility of guaranteed basic income for up to 4 years within a 10-year period to allow arts to work to pursue their careers with dignity, and pragmatically address the rising costs of things that can inhibit making art and creative events within the city, within the country at the moment, such as insurance, and looking at ways that we can introduce a state-backed indemnity scheme for artists as well. From an education perspective, I mean, I can't even call stickmen. They're a challenge for me. Thankfully, I have my sister, you see over there. She's the one who nurtures my child creatively. But we also need to embed that in our education system. We need to look at every stage of primary and secondary level, expanding it, putting it into the mainstream, expanding the creative schools programs, so we're fostering our artists of the future. We recognise the role that technology plays in arts at the moment and go beyond STEM and include arts in that. So we're looking at a STEAM-focused education policy. We know we need to address the erosion of space. We need space for people to make work, to create, to think, to build, rehearse, perform, exhibit. And we've lost that over the last number of years thanks to Fianna, Gael and Fianna Fáil policy to prioritise the needs of tourists and international students over our citizens, as we've watched countless studios, venues, markets, etc. being replaced by student accommodation and hotels. That has to stop. We've seen some success at the local level. We want to see that replicated by introducing national planning stations, art spaces in all new developments and on public land. Build more multi-purpose venues to accommodate both daytime and nighttime activities, and invest in the physical infrastructure that artists need to make and create work.
30 seconds, please.
Nighttime economy, hugely important to us as well. We've been working with Give Us the Night. We want to review the licensing and the costs associated with that, which is making it really hard for us to bring over international artists and to let people to dance. Like, we can't, there's nowhere to dance in the city anymore. We need to support funding for nightmares. We have a commitment in the Dublin Agreement to deliver one for Dublin, but we need to be doing that in all our cities around the country. These are just some of the really urgent, but we feel are implementable actions that we can deliver on and safeguard the creative culture of our country, which in my mind is the very essence of being Irish. We need actions that will progress the right type of creativity that goes just beyond Oscar Wilde and James Joyce, with no disrespect to them. I think our manifesto does that. And while obviously I hope that our party forms a significant part of the next all, possibly even government, no matter who is in there, and I think myself and Rebecca demonstrated that we need cross-party collaboration. We need to keep this conversation going. We need to ensure that policymakers and creators are talking to each other and engaging with each other so that we can work together as a country and really start to recognise and put the actual value on arts and creativity in this country and protect the economic, social and cultural value that that has, and to make sure the policy supports our creative community. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Richard Boyd was just making faces at me there because we got the order in terms of the size of the current size of the parties.
We're going for your late arrival. That's why you're on the end.
That's all right. There you are. You suffered for being late. Anyway, Richard Boyd Barrett of Solidarity People Before Profit.
I'm just hoping that order thing isn't sort of prophetic. I don't know. One of the thought I often have about the similarity between politics and art is, I think good politics and good art is about telling the truth, and bad politics and bad art is about pretending. There's a lot of pretending when it comes to talk about the arts by politicians, because the truth is that the arts has been the poor relation, to put it mildly, in the sort of hierarchy of priorities
for the political system. And when people say, as has been said here today, that it shouldn't be the case that when things get tough, the arts gets hits first, quite right, but that's not what happened. The arts and associated expenditures in education, in local government, in housing were savaged when things got tough. And the arts was savaged, and it was already at a pathetically low level, an insultingly low level, and remains so. When you consider that this country's international reputation at every level rests on our artists, our musicians, our writers, our poets, our novelists, and our theatre makers, it's really quite shameful the way our artists are treated and the way the arts are treated. And people before profit want to see a radical shift in that situation. And we're not just saying it in the teeth of an election. And it is not true, as the minister said, that Fine Gael are the people who have made the first commitment to double art spending. Our manifesto has proposed that every single year since I was elected in the Dáil, and the government then picked up on it, but haven't actually followed through on it. And I challenge people to look at the 2020 public expenditure estimates for the government on current arts expenditure, and you will see for the next 3 years, there is no increase on the ceilings proposed for arts expenditure. And this year, despite that commitment, there was a 1% increase, a pathetic 1% increase. Okay, so don't believe promises and pretense in advance of elections. Let's see the colour of the money. In our budget submission, every year for the last 3 years at least, we have proposed increasing expenditure as a start towards the doubling of it to €500 million. That's budgeted for. How would we pay for it? This isn't auction politics. We want to see a digital tax imposed on digital advertising, on the Googles, the Facebooks, all of these people who are paying less than 1% of tax because of massive tax loopholes. Why on earth is the taxpayer subsidizing these IT giants who are making enormous fortunes and dodging their tax? They should pay some tax, and that should be redirected back into the arts. And a particular priority for us is to end precarity for artists. We want to see all artists given a living income. They shouldn't be hounded to be looking for work when they have periods where they're not working. And specifically, we want to see a public works program established where, starting off, we would have at least 5,000 artists directly employed by the state, where they would get a decent living income in exchange for, when they're not working, using their creative talents in areas like mental health, education, community and youth services, in order to bring the arts deep into the grassroots of our society. We also think it is critical that we fund the arts in education. Here's a shocking fact. The per capita, the individual expenditure for horses in the equine industry is €6,700 per horse. The per capita spending for an art student is just over 4,000. Okay, so we are treating horses more seriously than our artists, and that's true of students generally. So we need to increase our arts expenditure to serious levels, to levels that show respect for our artists. There are other things I could say. I think we need to protect public service broadcasting. Whatever criticisms people have of RTE, we should defend the idea of public service broadcasting and provide the funding for it. I think we need to continue to fund film, but it should be linked to security of employment and income for people working in the film industry and more generally in the arts, and create companies of scale where we can build up pools of talent
and people who actually have security of income, employment, holiday entitlements, pension entitlements, and so on, in film and in other areas of the arts. Because unless you treat the artists with respect and give them some security, how do you expect them to continue to actually develop and enhance their artistic endeavours? So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
I think that's all the representatives we have here.
Sarah's
Sarah's here. She's just here.
Sorry.
Oh God, I just got to say hello, Sarah. And we do actually have a Sarah, so let me introduce Sarah Durcan. Sarah Durcan of the Social Democrats.
Apologies for being late. We just launched our manifesto. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the loss of Aoife White, a very dear colleague to all of us in the theatre. Temple Bar and the theatre will be less bright without her. You don't need me to tell you what a raw deal the arts have had under successive governments. We've had a decade of austerity. We have lost artists, we've lost creative talent, we've lost the ability to connect with people because we haven't been investing in them. The Social Democrats believe that our policies in housing, healthcare, education and transport will make your lives as artists more affordable. That underpins our cultural policy. And we have seen in successive governments that we have come nowhere near the European average in funding. And that is why the Social Democrats will not only double arts and culture funding over the next 5 years, we want to set out a roadmap to bring it to the EU average. And that is a major investment in our cultural sphere. That would be approximately between 1.5 billion and 2.2 billion if you are looking at a GDP of between 0.4 and 0.6% on average, which is the EU average. We have dropped down that. Now that is a large amount of money, and it goes right across all the departments that touch on that: education, healthcare, and the arts department, as well as broadcasting, heritage, libraries, etc. And what we would like to look at for the Arts Council is that we know that you are not able to make a living from the arts at the moment. I don't want to have any more conversations with artists who tell me they can't even afford to buy a sandwich during the day. I don't want to look you in the face when you tell me that you have to talk to your sister about having a shomra out the back to live in your old age, when you don't have pensions, when you don't have healthcare. That is not sustainable. And you are not the only workers that are in these precarious situations. But Artists of Ireland, we need you. We need you for your joy. We need you for what you do for us as a people. We need you for our international impact. We need you in our healthcare. We need you to help us solve the issues that face us in housing, in education, and in healthcare. So if we need you, we need to invest in you. And that is what the Social Democrats will do. If you want a social democratic future, if you want a party and a representative who not only cares about the arts, but is prepared to act on the arts, then I encourage you to vote number 1 for the Social Democrats in all your constituencies. So I'll go into a little bit of the detail about what we're talking. As I said, first and foremost, we would want to develop a roadmap to bring us into line with the EU average spending over the next 5 years.
Sarah, to be fair, you weren't here for my introduction,
I'm sorry.
so you have 2 minutes left.
Grant, no problem. I can go really fast. Special commercial rates for creative art spaces, enhanced support for Indigenous film and publishing industries, encouraging affordable work-life spaces for artists and creative practitioners, because not only are we losing our artists, we are losing those important creative spaces for recreation and for making work. Expanding the tax breaks for lower income artists, ensuring Ncfa has an understanding of irregular and freelance work, renewing section 481 for the film investment post-24, introduce mandatory requirements for local authority art spending, and encourage funding of creative industries and arts activities via enterprise boards and LEADER. We want to make sure that we have a unified policy between non-profit and for-profit creative industries, and introduce multi-annual funding for essential arts organisations to allow for long-term planning decisions. We've kind of danced around that for a while, but we really need to see that in a much more sustainable way. And ensure planning legislation takes into account cultural and creative spaces only. We know we need physical infrastructure investment as well, but what we've seen from the current government is a focus on that, and it is vital, it is important, but we need to see artists getting money into their pockets to be able to afford to live and to be able to afford to make work. We also support a nighttime economy. We want to revitalise that cultural economy in the evening. And we want to ensure the Irish media sector is protected and remains a robust industry. And a dedicated research and development fund for European cultural projects. Also, education is a huge area as well, and we very much support that. I won't go into the details on that, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, sir. I have tons of questions, and I'm not going to ask any of them because hopefully I'll get the opportunity to ask you my other professional capacities once we do over the next while about it. So I think we need to. I know we have a very engaged audience here. We have 2 mics in the room. We want to open it up and get as many questions in as quickly as possible. Questions, not statements, please. And also, ideally, questions in relation to one of the individuals we have here, as opposed to a broader thing. I'd like to get to specifics. Okay. Now.
Sorry, can we ask everybody to say who they are and where they're from as well?
That would be great. Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind. Also, you probably have to wave your hand really, because as you can see from my big thick glasses, I'm incredibly blind. So maybe you can, light up your phone or something and wave it in the air, or I'll point to it. Do we have somebody over here?
Yeah, hiya. Sorry, I'm waving. I'm Gavin Kostick. I'm the literary manager of Fishamble, the new play company. It seems most likely the outcome of this general election will be some form of coalition or supply and demand arrangements. My understanding is at that point the Partners Coalition will discuss what the programme for government will be and come up with a written programme for government that is actually enacted by the government. I would therefore like each candidate to commit now that all the fine words of the manifesto will be brought into the room as the core of the programme for government discussions and written down in prose so that we can see that that is part of the programme for government. Because otherwise, I'm afraid the fine words of the campaign tend to vanish when it comes to the prose of policy.
Can we go quickly?
Yeah, quickly, just to say, I hope you can hear me, can you?
There's
Yeah,
one
yeah.
there. Can you switch it over?
Technical genius here.
It's on. It's on already.
Thank you for the question. I think it's a crucial question. I'm the only one here on the stage that was involved in the programme for government, which took 70 days the last time. It was May 2016 when we managed to form a government with disparate independent groups and come to an arrangement with Fianna Fáil in terms of competence and supply. And I know that the programme for government is used on a daily basis in the Dáil in terms of holding the government to account in terms of commitments that they've made. I can reassure you on behalf of Fianna Gael and for myself that if I'm involved in any negotiations post this election, the arts, particularly because I've had the experience that I've had for the last 2 years, will be of crucial importance in those negotiations. And the commitments that I've made in relation to double the funding for the culture sector in particular, if you go, I think, from 158 million to 316 million, it's 288 million to 576 million for my department overall, and I can reassure you of that.
So Malcolm, I think you're perhaps the only party that's not making a specific long-term financial commitment.
Yeah, and I suppose listening to what Richard had said as well was about, it's about telling the truth rather than just auction politics and making all sorts of commitments. And there is a slight difference in terms of the tax side. We're not talking about large tax cuts for our overall programme is very much committed, as was our expectation in the confidence and supply arrangement, that there was an investment in services. We will be expecting within the programme for government that the balance would be 4-to-1 in terms of investment in public services versus tax cuts. And it has to be within the sums of money that we're expecting to have over the next 5 years. It's very easy to promise large sums of money without actually having the resources to be able to commit to them. But what I would say is look at the record when Fianna Fáil has been in government in terms of the investment in the arts going over the years. You're correct in terms of saying that the programme for government is probably far more important than the manifestos. I would anticipate we're going to have a multi-party government. It may be Fianna Fáil with the Greens and with Labour and possibly with others. So it is going to be a discussion between those parties when people are. I'm I'm not being presumptuous, but I do think that there is a need for a change.
There's a funny looking
There is,
thing.
there is a need. There is a need. Well, I think there is a need for a change in government, and if people want a realistic alternative, that's what we've got to look at.
Malcolm,
It will be a case. It will be a case. When I spoke, I outlined a number of very specific commitments, and one of the issues that I did clearly address was we will be increasing funding. But secondly, the other key, which is about the independence of our cultural institutions, will be written into the programme for government.
Okay, thanks for that. Fintan.
Thanks, Gavin. I'm not sure why it took Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael 90 days to form the last government. They're probably coming to the reality that they are at 50% net of the vote between themselves, less than 50% of the vote between themselves now. Gavin and Sinn Féin are in a constant negotiation in terms of politics, particularly in the north. I won't be in the room. I'm not running in this election, but I will inform the Sinn Féin leadership. I'm confident that they will be bringing that manifesto into the room.
Rebecca, when the Labour Party goes in to negotiate its programme for government.
I was going to say, I think people probably saw from my reaction there, I don't think that's absolutely certain. But what I will say is, I think through kind of my particular work on Dublin City Council and working on a cross-party basis, where in the Dublin Agreement we were entering negotiations, I think myself and Cllr were both very, very clear that we wanted to put the work that we had done on the arts agenda over the previous 5 years into the agenda for the next 5 years. The other thing I will say about a programme for government is it's often written down and then those kind of key commitments to sticking to it fall by the wayside over the next 5 years. So I think that it is important that the sector continue to engage beyond election time and in between elections to try and hold parties to account and make sure that they are sticking to those commitments in programme for government. Because I know from my experience that sometimes things are written down in flowery language and they're not that accountable. And I think it's important that over the course of the 5 years, the sector continues to engage and keeps a particular government accountable in terms of metrics and how they're doing. And I think that's as important.
Thanks. Claire, everybody wants the Greens in coalition apparently, so you can name your price.
We'll find out next weekend. Yeah, I mean, look for, sorry, I missed the question there, but
It's
in relation to
It's in relation to the programme for government and the commitments that you make in
Yes.
your manifesto. Will they be red lines essentially when negotiating the programme for government?
Yeah, I mean, ideally for everyone's manifesto with red lines, but then, I mean, the most likely outcome is that we will be dealing with, potentially a number of different parties trying to agree on a programme for government. So I'm not going to sit here and say, yes, we're going to get absolutely everything in our manifesto in a PFG, but, we'll certainly fight for it. And I do, genuinely believe that our party is very, very committed to what we have outlined in our manifesto in terms of arts, culture and heritage. I think it's very achievable. I think it's very realistic. And should we be around that negotiating table as arts and culture spokesperson, I would be making sure that it's at the forefront of discussions.
Richard, I'm not sure if you see yourself negotiating a programme for government after this election.
Well, I'm not primarily, and people for profit are not primarily concerned about being in power. We're interested primarily about changing things. And if you can change them in power, good. If you're better off sticking to your principles and building movements for that change, which I think ultimately it's movements and people who change things, then you should do that. And that would inform our attitude towards this question, because you see, and this is where politics and ideology does come into it, right? In the rest of Europe, they spend 6 times more on the arts than we do on average, okay? And that's related to a more general feature of Europe versus Ireland. We spend 28% of GDP on public expenditure. The average in Europe is 41%. So that's why the arts are underfunded. That's why we don't have public housing. That's why our public health system is in bits. That's why we have the most expensive and some of the worst public transport in Europe. That's why childcare is more expensive than anywhere else in Europe. That's why we have the most overcrowded classrooms. It's linked to politics and ideology. And that's why, in our view, if you want to actually see the sort of manifestos that are being articulated here followed through on, you have to break from the cycle of centre-right politics. Because whatever they may say now, when the crunch came in 2008, when the economy went over a cliff, arts was savaged, right? and Fine Gael. Fine Gael and Labour also cut the budget. I remember it well. Right?
Okay, I am going to do my Ivan Yates here now. Sarah.
Yes is the answer. You know, we are saying in the Social Democrats that we are going to put Irish culture and Irish arts at the heart of Irish life and the heart of public policy. And as I know from the last 5 years of campaigning, if you're not on at the table, you're on the menu. So we have to be there at the table, and we have to put our commitments forward to be part of a programme for the government. So yes is the simple answer to that.
Right, great. Thanks for that. And thanks, Gavin, for that question. A question up here.
Hi, my name is John Gunning. I'm a freelance lighting designer, and despite appearances, I recently turned 25. It's a very important age because it's the age at which I become eligible to receive the full dole, which is a massive for emerging artists. I'm in the first year in which I could probably be considered not an emerging artist. Does any representative here have a commitment to reinstate full dole benefits for people under the age of 25?
Who has a commitment to doing that?
I have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that we do.
As will I. We have the social welfare scheme. I'm not sure if you were here for when I spoke.
It's the job seeker balance.
This is a specific age-related element of the job seeker.
It is there.
Okay, I think we got the party's position on the under 25s point. You take another question. Do we have a microphone over here?
Yeah, I'm Angus O'McAnally, a freelance actor and artistic director of Rise Productions. I'm wondering if any of the speakers on stage are disputing the figures put forward by the Ncfa. Because if not, what is the logic for not doubling art spend overnight? If we're talking about a sure bet, risk-free, immediate, 100% return on investment, fiscally, how are you arguing against doubling funding now?
Okay, thanks for that, Angus, and I will put this to the Minister, and the reason I will put it is that I'm sure many of you recall that when this number was first emerged, it was put out, I think, the national campaign, and it was disputed by the department, which under then Minister Heather Humphreys, and the department said that those figures were not correct, and said that they would actually come back with detail, and I never saw the detail, so I'd be interested to hear it.
Correct. I think it's an important. Sorry. I think it's an important question that you raise, and I know you wrote an article in relation to it as well. So, it was first muted, from the Taoiseach in terms of the commitment to the funding. The figures that I think are generally accepted, in my view, are from 2017. I think the NSV may be based on different figures. They don't tally with mine. I gave you the figures earlier on. It is a double up commitment that we're going to bring forward. And I think it's important to stress as well that in this particular budget that we had, all sectors, like there was no cut, there was an increase. Richard Ward Barrett said it was 1%, it wasn't 1%. And in fact, since I've been in the department, it's increased by 23% overall.
Just for clarity, just one point, because just to be clear what the question was. The question was, do you accept the disparity which was laid out between the European average and Irish expenditure of 6 to 1? Do you accept that?
At the end of the day, the difficulty that we've had was Brexit in terms of the budget. I think it's something, and even when we're making commitments in relation to double up the funding, if there is a shock in relation to Brexit, we're going to be in a very difficult situation.
You need to answer the question that has been asked.
And whether we like it or not,
You have 3 minutes. You need to answer the question that Angus O'McAnally asked about whether you dispute the figures.
I mentioned about the figures. I can tell you the figures that I have, which I've given to you earlier on. The 2017 figure was 158 million, and by 2025 it'll be 316 million. That's an overall from 288 million to 576 million. I think it slightly differs what the NCA figures were, because their commitment was based on earlier.
I think to be fair, and to be fair to the questioner as well, there is a dispute, and you're correct. Yeah. I have written about that, about the time frame and the targets. But the question was about the differential between European average.
With respect to for clarity, for the specific figures that I'm referring to is that for every euro invested, 2 comes back. Mm-hmm. That therefore eliminates any discussion of Brexit shocks, fiscal space, anything else. Okay. This is not costing, it is general.
And I wish you were that input. Can I say to you, first of all, biggest supporter of the arts. I want to continue to do that. But the reality is, and there are economic benefits, but I'm the only person here who's been in negotiations with Pascal Donoghue for the last 2 years, desperately trying, being the Cinderella around the cabinet table, and has been for decades. And to be honest, to actually be able to secure any sort of increase in that context was extremely difficult. And I stand over the best that I have done over the last number of years, and I know that the Taoiseach and Pascal Donoghue are completely committed to doubling the funding by 2025. We have said it time again, and as I said earlier, we have cabinet commitment to that, which has never been there before. So no other party has that commitment in a binding way that we have given.
Okay, we've got your answer there. Now, can we just try to get one or two more questions in? Down here.
Hi, Maria Fleming. I'm currently one of the 47% without health insurance on sick leave from the Dublin Theatre Festival. I've been working in the arts for over 25 years, and I can safely say that I've never seen it so precarious for people working in the arts. And I've been lucky in the support that I've had, but I know that I have colleagues in the room that were in the situation that I'm in now, they would be, much worse off. And to borrow a phrase from Greta Thunberg, our house is on fire, and we need you to do something about it. And my question is primarily to the Minister and to the representative from Fianna Fáil, because I think some of the other representatives addressed this. I didn't hear in your speeches how you're going to actually, on a day-to-day basis, make a difference to artists so that they can feel secure and not have to leave the career that they love and feel passionate about, and that we need them to do. And that when somebody that's working in the arts gets a chronic diagnosis, their first thought shouldn't be, I'm really fucked financially. There are two things. I think it's a really important question, and I was adamant in the short term that I had to bring in the social welfare scheme, which allows artists 12 months leeway. So the normal labour activation.
That is untrue.
I know,
every artist
no,
needs.
it's not true.
It's not new.
No,
It's not true.
Sorry.
You need every artist needs.
If I could just finish.
It's very specific.
I'm sorry, it's
very
untrue. You
specific
can't
criteria
speak
to avail of it. And otherwise you are shamed. You are shamed by investors.
I have stood in the
by
Joe
investigators
office.
coming
I
in.
have put in an appeal. It is untrue what you are saying.
Okay.
The end.
It isn't. So if there's a particular case that you would like to take up with me afterwards, I have no difficulty speaking to you about it and talking to the Unit Authority about it.
I don't
But
want myself to be looked
launched
after.
that
I want
scheme.
everybody to be looked
With
after.
respect, I launched
What
that
you're saying
scheme
is
with the Unit
untrue.
Authority. I don't actually speak untruths with respect. And I like to think that I have my own reputation in terms of my own credibility. So my understanding has been that there's a social welfare scheme where you do not have, the normal labour activation measures do not kick in for at least 12 months to allow the artists time to get their work together. And the second part then...
You might want to let them know in
that
the
I
intro
mentioned
office and the appeals office that that's the case.
is legislation in terms of banning zero-hour contracts, and Regina Doherty brought that in as well. We're doing everything that we can.
And that part is also untrue.
And to make, well, I think with respect, that's a little unfair. And when I
We're
personally
speaking
have worked in
from
this for the
personal
last 2 years,
experience.
if there's a particular case, I would love to speak to you about it afterwards.
Could you address the point in relation to illness, being in precarious employment with
Yeah, I just said the
Okay.
legislation that I put in.
Can I come in, because I did reference when I was speaking in terms of the theatre form review and in terms of the assessments there that needs to be addressed. My sister's an artist, I have lots of friends, so I could say that I can understand the challenge that's there. Part of it is about, and Richard was right, part of it is about looking at the investment in public services, because it's not just about trying to address it in an individual sector. There are questions around healthcare, around access to housing, and so on that are going to be essential in terms of being able to address some of those issues. But part of the commitment that we've made is in terms of the review, that what we want to do, and this is where I spoke with a lot of the Minister's commitment and the commitment to investment is in capital projects, and that's all very welcome, but what we also need to look at is in current funding to be able to ensure that artists can live and work sustainably. Can I just very briefly on the previous question, which was related, because the other part of this is around funding. And in a bizarre way, I agree with Richard as well, which is around the funding side. And I know he was talking about taxing on a lot of the big companies, the biggest. One of the big challenges over the next number of years, which we failed to act on, is the implementation of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive here in Ireland. Well, yeah, but Minister, that's a plan. The fact is, in Germany and France, they've already implemented their plan. It's not because there are income sources. Hang on.
The arts budget by 67 million.
I'm talking about where we're talking about the funding that needs to come, and we do need to address that, because if we are going to generate income from content streaming services and so on to be able to fund content creation here, that's how we can look at funding the arts and media over the next number of years. And with respect to Minister, the department hasn't been up to speed in terms of doing that. But specifically in response to your question, yes, the theatre reform review, as I mentioned, the findings within that need to be addressed.
Okay, do we have time for one more question?
I have a question up here.
Okay.
Two here.
Well, we'll try and get them in. Who's first? One up here.
Yes, thank you. My name is Anya Moriarty, and I'm the Chief Executive with the Irish Film and Television Academy. And there's a few of us here in solidarity with the other artists, because there's so much to be said. And like there's a sense of us as an academy that we're out there, we're doing our thing, and we're well funded, and we represent so many. We've got 16 chapters of discipline, we've got 1,240 members. But our members are at the grassroots. A lot of them are at the grassroots as well, trying to raise funds to do the artwork that they're doing, whether because it's on screen and so forth. But I think we all in this room would agree with Richard Barrett strongly, even the others on that panel, that there's
I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are under
a huge difference. Yeah,
okay.
There's a huge difference between what we get to the arts here in Ireland and in Europe. And we've just finished, and yesterday launched our 5-year strategic development plan.
Okay, thanks, Sonia, but that's a statement about the question.
Yeah, so the big thing for us is that the funding across Europe to arts organisations like us is huge, and like 100% funding to organisations like us in Italy, in France.
So you want 100% funding? Yeah, I hear that. Okay.
What can you do for even organisations like us? Some of you mentioned mortgages and so forth.
Right. We're going to take that along with 2 more questions, and then we're going to wrap it. So we get somebody else got a microphone here. We get it straight away.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, John Ryan. I used to be an artist. I'm not anymore. There's kind of 2 parts to this question. I was looking at the International Association of Copyright Collection Agencies over the last couple of weeks. And according to them, Ireland should be collecting approximately 85 million per annum in copyright for distribution to artists across all disciplines, including film, literature, and visual arts. So my first question is, what plans do the candidates have for enforcing the Copyright Act to ensure that all people who are eligible, including performers, can access their copyright? That's the first part. The second part, I was delighted to hear that the support for Section 481. Let's be clear about Section 481. According to the department's own documentation, Section 481 has a net fiscal impact of 1. That means it doesn't cost anything. The economic activity generated by it generates sufficient tax to cover the outlay. In 2017, Section 481 released 91 million euro into the audiovisual sector. Why not extend Section 481 across the entire culture sector?
Okay, and the last question.
I think I have the last question. Barry Kenny asked us was a very succinct question. Just go back to the core Ncfa campaign, which is about doubling investment specifically in the 2 affected organisations and the timeline. So this is to Minister Madigan. The timeline has moved consistently over the recent past since the Taoiseach made the commitment. You yourself stood up in the Dáil in April this year and said over the next 10 years. How are we to believe that either the doubling or the timeline, given the repeated requests from this representative organisation for a roadmap and for details of how you propose to do this, as well as the constant moving of the timeline, it would really be very beneficial if we could get some clarity on the timeline.
We get one more question.
One more question, okay.
Hi, my name is Colin O'Brien. I'm a freelance actor. My question is in regards to public broadcasting. Who here on the panel could commit to either 1, taxing the people to pay for public broadcasting, or having a more progressive tax on streaming services like Netflix and Amazon who actually pay for public broadcasting? And just my last thing is a point of clarification for Minister Madigan. The artist dole, you are immediately precluded from it if you take on any part-time work outside of acting or any artistic endeavour you do. So it doesn't meet the needs of all actors. And in fact, many actors are shamed in dole offices, told, despite the fact that their agent is constantly getting them auditions and they're applying for work all the time, they are told to get another job in another field. And that's not just for actors, that's for many artists around the country.
Can I just, address some of those queries? I mean, first of all, to say the social welfare scheme, I mean, that was a pilot project, first of all, which I've now made permanent. I'm not saying at all that everything is done. There will always be more asks, but we have to start somewhere and see how it is. It's always going to be reviewed to see how it works out. So there are issues in relation to it. I'm very happy to hear them, and I'm happy to see what I can do into the future.
What about the question of
the
time?
Yeah, I'm trying to go back to the questions.
Sure.
There's the roadmap. I'm working at the moment on a roadmap with the department in terms of a timeline, but I've said the timeline 2017 to 2025.
But you said in this year that it was 2029. You said
2025.
You said in April this year over the next 10 years. That's 2029. Which is it? Leo said one thing.
I don't know
on
where
your
that came
Facebook
from.
page.
Yeah, but that must be an error because it's always
But you said it on the record of the
2017
Dawn
to
and you published it.
2025. So just to clarify that. Also in relation to section 481, we've extended that to 2024 and we've also had a 5% regional uplift. And it's of huge importance. We want to make sure that Ireland is somewhere that's attractive to people to make films. We've seen the success of Troy Studios.
And if it's so successful, why not extend it to other cultural areas as suggested?
Yeah, and again, that is something that will be reviewed consistently. I mean, this is why something like this is very worthwhile because, you know, we need to hear from you what we're trying to do. Some of the asks that you've been looking for in the Ncfa, we've delivered on. There's an awful lot more that we still have to do. But, you know, doubling the funding is going to go a massive way to assisting with that and also in other policy areas as well.
Does anybody just want to take the question about the funding?
And just to say, Fianna Fáil, even though, I know she has a funeral to attend in her constituency today. No, but just to say, since March 2018, when Fianna Fáil promised to deliver a policy paper on culture, they didn't. They've absolutely published no policy paper, and nor have Labour. So, you know, with respect.
Does anybody want to?
I'm going to address specifically the public sector broadcasting relates to Section 481. Yes, it makes a lot of sense to extend Section 481 to theatre production, music production, gaming, to that sector. And certainly the 5% regional uplift does make sense. So I think that can be targeted. It does make sense. Specifically with regard to public sector broadcasting, we do need a new model in terms of funding. And that's why I referenced specifically the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, because how we are going to look at generating revenue from content streaming services. And this is where I'm critical, and I was critical of the Minister on this. We need to look about how we can engage Irish consumers to collect that revenue. The problem has been is that, we've been very slow at a domestic level. In France and Germany, they've already moved ahead and implemented their plans. We haven't. That's why I did reference you earlier on about that it may make sense in the context of a new government and program for government, that when the Department of Arts is established, that the not communications move in, but certainly the media element and content creation element would be within the same department.
I want to take one last question because it's on a very important and pressing issue.
It's a really short question. The arts is so important in terms of holding public memory, and I want to ask the candidates today, then can they commit that in government they would oppose the 75-year closing of institutional archives in Ireland?
Does anybody disagree with that?
No, you're completely entitled to that information. And also in terms of restoring and protecting the state's memory, we're losing everything that goes online. The National Library are responsible for archiving everything in print. Nothing has been put in place despite we passed an amendment in the Senate. We passed an amendment in the Senate. They are archiving it. They're not allowed to share it because we don't have the legislation.
Unfortunately, our format doesn't work very well for an argument between a lot of you because you only have one microphone. Do we have? No, we don't.
Can I say also, just as a musician, YouTube is shocking. They say Spotify is bad. YouTube is worse. They need artists. Artists need them. Users deserve to get access. But the multinational profits need to come into play. And just on public broadcasting as well, I think RTE, DG Cllr should be entitled to charge Sky and Virgin Media boxes for retransmission. Currently, people who have a Sky box are paying both their licence fee and they're paying Sky. RT don't get any money from Sky or Virgin or the Cllr for the transmission of those fees. And I think a Section 481 scheme for culture should absolutely be looked at, and we need a collection agency for copyright.
Okay, thanks very much.
A question about the archives, please.
We did.
I think everybody did say they were in favour of it. I think we do have to leave. Everybody's, clock is ticking here. These people are incredibly busy at the moment. We do need to wrap it up now, but I want to thank them all for taking the time, and I think answering as honestly as possible the questions that they were asking.
Could I, on your behalf, thank LINEHAN for stepping in to service with us today. Can I thank all of you for your participation, and can I thank all of you sincerely for your time. We're in dire straits, so I think you can appreciate the excitement and the frustration in the room. Thank you for addressing it. Very, very lastly, and I know you're under pressure, if we could have everybody on your feet, and if we could have all the representatives out in front here for a quick photograph, and then we'll let you go. Thank you, everyone.
Okay.